You are listening to the Marc Guzman podcast experience.
And it's NIMBYism. So we're going to switch this up a little bit. We typically do property analysis here at the end of the show. We are going to switch it up here. And instead of doing that, we're going to talk about a very hot topic right now in the Bay Area that really ties into why properties are so expensive to rent and to buy, and it's NIMBYism.
In fact, now, just for you who don't know, what NIMBYism is short for NIMBY, which is an acronym for not in my backyard. Again, this is a term associated to an individual or a group of individuals that will actively stop a specific change, like a development or a new project coming into their town. It could be a grocery store, it could be a plant, it could be a power plant, it could be new housing. Not in my backyard. And that's this group of people or individual or people who will essentially align themselves with a good lawyer and be able to take old laws or certain new laws that were used and designed to protect certain people and kind of twist it where it really hurts other people or the economy as a whole.
Now, NIMBYs, which is what we're going to call them, historically have been property owners, but we're seeing a big wave of even renters jumping into the whole NIMBY bandwagon.
By the time I came into the area, most of the NIMBYs that I encountered are renters, right? And so these are the same individuals who are complaining that housing is old and antiquated and we need more housing, yet they're the same individuals who will come in and stop new housing developments. And they don't own, they simply rent. I mean, I can tell you stories. I encountered one person who, she was a dream therapist, and to get around and persuade her, I literally had to befriend her, take her out to a cup of coffee a couple of times until she actually liked me and then voted for what a project I was working on. But it went to that level of extent because this person prolonged a project or approval of a project I had for a good 6 months until I had to literally sit down with this person and roll up my sleeves and go do the non-traditional route.
Yeah, it's funny. So many people are complaining about expensive rents, expensive housing, yet as soon as a project gets announced, they go and run off to stop it because they're in favor of more housing. They just don't want it in their backyard right next to them. A good example is over there on Ashby BART. They wanted to essentially take that BART station with all the extra parking and essentially build a lot of units around it. In fact, we have SB 50, the Senate Bill 50 right now that if it passes would allow for individuals or developers to build high density housing near high levels or high public transit centers. So if you're near BART, railroad, anything that can capture a lot of public transportation activity, you can then build high density regardless of the zoning laws from the city. And this would allow more developers to build housing. But
now
guess what? No surprise, cities are against it.
Keep in mind the practicality of that law, which is one, California, and actually most places have a housing crisis, right? And so if you build a multi-unit building next to rapid public transportation, it allows you to create workforce housing to house all the people coming into the state for all the great jobs and weather and cheese that we offer, and be able to, without having to buy a car, jump onto a rapid transit, get into work, and come out without having to congest the already congested freeways. So these things would all be extremely beneficial, not only for the city and the property taxes they generate. More people moving in would supply more consumers for retail, more sales tax. All of these things would just improve the city, give the cities more money for fixing streets and other public services. And all in all, create a better use of the land rather than just single houses or old antiquated houses that are falling apart.
And not necessarily for new people moving into the Bay Area, but also for the people existing here, already living here. Instead of 4, 5, 6 people bunking up in a 2-bedroom, hey, it'd be nice that maybe there were 3 units available for these 6 people.
And again, the whole idea of this, for example, we're going to talk about and touch on certain homeless housing projects that were designed to take the homeless off the street as part of this, and how this ties into NIMBY.
Well, let's jump into San Jose.
And in fact, before we do that, just to kind of give you a historical background on NIMBYism, or not in my backyard, thanks to our producer, Sam, he pulled up a couple of historical facts that actually bridge some of my own personal knowledge and experience with this stuff. And a lot of the whole trend of NIMBYism started back in 1916, when specific zoning laws as to whether a district would be zoned retail or commercial versus single-family residential or multi-unit residential were put into place. Eventually, these laws, during the time when segregation and prejudice really existed, also were put into place to keep blacks outside of white areas, or to segregate Asian minorities out of white areas. Now, again, with the passing of the Equal Housing Act, or Equal Housing Opportunity Act, a lot of these laws became vestigial. They're still there, but you can't use them anymore. In fact, case in point, the first time I encountered one of these types of laws was when I was selling an apartment building in Richmond. And in Richmond, which has a high minority population, there were actual CC&Rs in place that specifically said no black people or people of color could live in this place. But if not for the new laws that have been put into place to supersede those old laws that were put there to kind of create zoning restrictions and other restrictions in place, then that law would still be in effect. So if one day the Equal Housing Opportunity Act went away, people of color would not be allowed to live in certain parts of Richmond because of old laws that were passed there. And so now, jumping fast forward back into our present day of 2020, let's tackle the housing problem that's now existing in San Jose, what San Jose and Oakland have done to try to fix the housing problem.
Yeah, so San Jose, I mean, no surprise here, when you have very expensive rents, very expensive housing prices, you end up with a very high homeless population. So of course the solution then is, well, let's help out the homeless population. Now it doesn't always tie into the actual expensive housing, because homelessness, there's plenty of studies that show there's a big percentage of them that also have mental health illnesses.
Correct.
Right. So there's a lot that goes on with homelessness. So it's not just tied to the housing market. However, the housing market does play a small factor into it, and the fact that they don't have a place to live. And so one of the ways that have been shown to prove to fix homelessness is to get people the mental health that they need, and also a stable place where they can live to get back on their feet, get a stable job, and get back into society, because many times that's what these people need. People need our help to get them back into society. And so San Jose had a great plan. They've looked at studies done in Portland, in Seattle, and they have policies that work. And so San Jose wanted to take those same policies and put them in place in their city, and essentially build homeless shelters, and not just really shelters, but nice little tiny, kind of like tiny home units.
Yeah, in fact, we just came from touring a modular factory. Modular factory is a new technology of building houses, apartment buildings, office buildings, you name it, in a factory, not prefab, mind you. Modular is completely different from prefab.
And these are 200-300 square foot units that are amazing, brand new, and much cheaper to build.
Yeah, high tech, really pretty.
And much cheaper to build.
Yeah.
And so San Jose put together this plan to build something like, what was it, 80 units? Or
correct.
80 to 90 units, putting in various different locations. However, what happened was the NIMBYs. People complain that there's too many homeless people. Then when the city puts together a plan to fix the homeless crisis, guess what? Now all these people don't want them to place these homeless people in their place. It's like they just want them to round up and ship them to a different city, right, which has been done by so many progressive cities, including San Francisco. San Francisco literally for the Super Bowl took buses of homeless people and dropped them off in Reno, Nevada. How messed up is that?
Yeah,
wow. But that's a whole nother story. So San Jose is trying to come up with a solution. San Jose had a great solution. following and copying a solution that's worked in other cities. And guess what? The NIMBYs basically came in, stopped all these different projects, basically saying, look, we're in full support of homeless people getting shelter, but we don't want it within so many feet of our schools. We don't want it within so many feet of our homes.
And long story short, what was supposed to be 80 housing units went down to how many?
4
to house the homeless. And in fact, I just said earlier, we were touring a modular factory because I'm looking at building some apartment buildings and I'm looking at modular vendors. And in fact, while we were there, completely unrelated to what I was there for, they showed us how Oakland, the city of Oakland, had their own housing project for the homeless. And in fact, the city of Oakland went out to this modular company to retain their services to build like 100 modular homes, this pretty building. And in fact, they've built them all. They're ready to be shipped and put there. If not for, they can't get a permit passed.
And this is the city of Oakland, cannot issue the city of Oakland a permit.
And again, what this is, a big reason why this is probably in place or happening is because people are constantly filing motions, the NIMBYs, through their attorneys that will, delay the process, ask for one more inspection, essentially, stopping progress to solve a very problem that they're complaining about. So whether it's housing the homeless, giving them better abilities to get themselves out of the position they're in, from education to medical, it also stops the progress of being able to build housing. So whether the housing is affordable or luxury, just by the sheer infusion of more available housing, you're going to be able to make it more affordable because you've created more supply. If not for people tweaking or pushing little aspects of the law that'll continue to delay things because of essentially a fear of change. Whether it's a fear of poor people moving in and destroying the neighborhood, or minorities moving in, or people with too much education who make too much money, that's called gentrification, moving in and changing the environment. And these NIMBYs have now, whereas they originally started with the upper class, rich, white people, it's now even people who are renting. And of any race, it's not just whites, it's any race, can come in and basically go, oh, I'm being displaced, this is horrible, it's going to turn, it's making it, I'm unable to live in this specific area, we need to delay this out for a hearing for another year or two.
Or sometimes it's not even just to stop a project, it's the BS that some developers have to deal with, like your example of having to place $150,000 of artwork on a building.
Correct.
Which, guess what? That raises the price of construction. That raises the price of the rental. And if you sell it, same thing. Like it becomes more expensive because of $150,000 of required artwork because the neighbors want to see something beautiful.
Correct. And now, if you put this in perspective, right? You asked, well, we're talking about all these various factors that make it unaffordable and to live in the Bay Area, but at the same time, the Bay Area continues to grow in spite of this. Well, earlier on, I talked about the Equal Housing Opportunity Act, which was a law that was put into place to essentially kind of like put an end to all the noise that was being created whenever minorities would try to move into a specific area. It's not too much dissimilar from the fight going on right now between trying to improve the infrastructures, create more housing, and the fight that people who are trying to put that kind of stuff into place have to undergo every time because of old vestigial laws that are taken advantage of through, savvy attorneys just looking to make fees, being, representing not in my backyard individuals who want to stop the change in the progress.
And don't forget the spineless politicians who they just want to be voted back in. And so they basically pandered to the constituents the NIMBYs that want to keep them in power. And so, look, the solution is pretty simple. We need to build housing units, right? Everything comes down to supply and demand. And if your supply decreases, right, or if demand increases or a combination of those two, you're going to have an increase in prices. So to fix that, you need to either increase the supply or lower the demand. Well, how are we going to lower the demand when the first 2 months of this year, the Bay Area created 81% of the jobs.
Right.
I mean, are you going to go around and start telling companies, hey, you can't hire anyone else, you can't expand anymore? Now you have a much bigger crisis.
And
at
even
that
more
point.
important than that, just making it easier to get past all the Byzantine bureaucracy to get something built, just making that aspect easier, whether you're building affordable housing, luxury housing, retail space, or homeless housing. All of these different things would not only improve old antiquated architecture that's currently there in certain places, improve our infrastructure so that you have better ability to get to and from places and we don't have congested freeways. It would also affect all kinds of other aspects of life, like the medical field. For example, a lot of the homeless, they're a huge burden on the medical field because they're going to commit more crimes many times, or they're going to do more drugs, and all of this ends up impairing their health. Overcrowding our already overcrowded public health services.
What's one of the biggest pieces of advice that medical doctors give to people when they're sick? Stay home from work, stay home, don't go outside, rest up.
Right.
Well, guess what? If you don't have a home, where are you going to rest? Where are you going to recover from?
You will be a vector for a pathogen.
You're literally going to be back in the hospital every single day. And then that increases costs. And
right.
It's just a no-brainer situation to get homeless people into their own personal shelter, help them get the medical that they need to get back into society. It just produces a much better and healthier society. There's plenty of studies out there that prove that. But it comes down to building supply. And the problem is NIMBYism. We're at a point where people need to just kind of give up a little bit of their selfishness and just understand that we're all in this together. One of the best quotes, we're all still monkeys on a rock flying at 50,000 miles per hour in space. We're literally all monkeys on a rock. And so we're all in this together, and it simply comes down to we need to give a little bit to make a better society. And so we need to build more housing for people.